Thank you very much, Chandi, fellow panelists, Ms. Renana Jabwala, Martha and Chris from WeGo, Shobha from Sabah in Nepal, Ms. Devaki Jain. What an honor for me to be on this panel with you. I do have to take a photograph so I can show off to my colleagues back home. If you may allow me, to my colleague from the UN Women Office for India, and Representative Ms. Rebecca Reichman-Tavares, delegates, participants, sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, all good afternoon. I want to start by bringing greetings on behalf of UN Women and thank HomeNet and WeGo for this invitation and inclusion of UN Women at this milestone meeting of networks from, I understand, 24 countries from around the world in the continuing quest for ensuring that home-based workers enjoy the full range of human rights and participate more equitably and benefit more equitably from growth and development. I congratulate you on this first global conference. Isn't that wonderful? And I celebrate with you as you have adopted your Delhi Declaration as well as your action plan, which clearly specifies the range of actors who are implicated in ensuring or securing recognition and valuing of women's work, and in particular women home-based workers. Shandi, I understand that UNIFEM, as we then were, and HomeNet and WeGo have a long-established partnership, including the co-hosting of the conference in 2000 from which the Kathmandu Declaration issued. And that was an agenda, as we've been reminded this morning, which strengthens state accountability or sought to strengthen state accountability for the conditions under which home-based workers worked, as well as for ensuring access to social protection, to markets, and to economic resources. The Kathmandu Declaration, it seems to me, was quite historic, building on the ILO Convention 177, but also coming after the Beijing Platform for Action, which also spoke to the inadequate labor standards, poor working conditions, the lack of social security for women in informal sectors, and in particular, home-based workers. This is a document I keep going back to read, the Beijing Platform for Action, and I do encourage you to do that. And I'm always quite startled at how comprehensive that document was and how far-reaching and how analytical and how deep. So, and back in 1995, home-based workers were also a focus of the Beijing Platform for Action. And in this regard, I want to especially recognize Ms. Chandi Joshni, who pioneered this work within UNIFEM, and along with Feroza Mehrotra, who also was our deputy RPD in the UNIFEM office here in Delhi. Chandi's been very generous to me and, talking about being so busy coming back from leave and all of that. And I said yes, and so kind. But really, it's nothing like that. When I joined UNIFEM, Chandi Joshni was a big name, a legend in UNIFEM. And we were never on the same page or the same table or had the same status in UNIFEM ever. But she's kind to suggest that. So, of course, when she wrote me yes on Facebook to say, would I like to come to Delhi in February, I really had no choice but to say, of course. And especially since she now has the title of enforcer. No way I could say no to her. But thank you very much for your kind invitation. So happy to be here. I want to just speak a little bit about the Beijing Platform for Action and connect what you're doing here to that, as well as to the ongoing review of the Platform for Action and the post-2015 agenda setting, which is also ongoing right now. The Platform for Action contains quite comprehensive recommendations to governments, to trade unions, the private sector, to ensure a more appropriate or expansive protection of labor laws, social security benefits for home-based workers. The Platform for Action also speaks to the need to strengthen women's economic capacity, including through access to finance, credit, training, markets, and commercial networks, much of which you have reiterated here today in the adoption of your Delhi Declaration. And importantly, the Platform for Action also promotes organizing as a mechanism for advancing women's rights. So friends, the timing of this first global conference on home-based workers is significant. This year, 2015, is crucial because we are now also reviewing at the global level the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, and we are marking the beginning of a new era of development through the proposed Sustainable Development Goals, which are under negotiation as we speak. At regional and national level, much as Devaki has already alluded to, there is what I call, or what I think of as an increasing politicization of the widening inequalities within and between countries. And why do I say politicization? I say that because there's a sense of a greater awareness that this is a status quo that is harmful, that must end, and that we must all in our work put inequalities at the front and center of our advocacy and our activism. In Asia, for example, I understand 0.001%, so 0.001%, I don't even know mathematically what that would look like, of the population owns 30% of the region's wealth, 30% of the region's wealth. And this is a gendered experience as women continue to form the bulk of the poor, whether as unpaid family workers or engaged in the informal economy without any form of social protection across the life cycle. Women's movements have therefore challenged the rhetoric, they call it the rhetoric, of human rights. They've challenged the rhetoric of equality and sustainability, which they argue cannot be realized without a transformation of the dominant global macroeconomic agenda to which Devaki has also already alluded. It is for this reason that at the recently held Asian Pacific Regional Conference on Beijing Plus 20, civil society organizations, some 187 of them from across Asia and the Pacific, called for what they're defining as development justice, a justice that requires governments to end the gross inequalities of wealth, power, resources, and opportunities that exist both between countries, between rich and poor, and between men and women within countries. And so because of this increasing global attention to inequalities, more and more, the Open Working Group, the group of member states that were charged with developing a proposal for the post-2015 agenda, that Open Working Group has recommended a standalone goal on gender equality, goal number 5, which refers to the achievement of gender equality and, importantly, the empowerment of women and girls. So I think that that's actually one step, even in the title of the goal, it's one step beyond what we had under the MDGs. And this goal is focused on ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls, including in the sphere of economic activity. Specificity has been and must be given, we are saying, to gender inequality because, one, it is universal. No matter where we are in the world, whether we're in a developed country or a rich country, a high GDP country or a low GDP country, gender inequality is a feature of women's lives. It is cross-cutting, that is to say, it coexists with and compounds other inequalities. For example, class inequalities, labor inequalities, as is the case with home-based workers. And thirdly, it is experienced both in the public and the private sphere. And I want to come back to this dichotomy of the public and private sphere sometime later in the talk. In our consultations then with women globally, we meaning UN Women, they tell us that women need voice, women need choice, and women need safety. We need international and national commitments to ensure that women participate in decision-making in the public sphere, but also in the private sector and in the context of the household to influence allocation of resources, power, and importantly, authority. And women need more choice through enhanced capabilities, through education, decent work, access to productive resources, land, credit, reproductive health services, and social protection, much of which you have also covered in your Delhi Declaration today. And finally, violence against women is a constraining factor in the lives of all women and girls, and we need to eliminate this to ensure their safety. So much of this voice, choice, and safety agenda articulated by women globally is now contained in the proposed Goal 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals. But beyond that, given the centrality of the discourse around inequalities and intersecting inequalities, the Open Working Group has also recommended another goal, Goal 10, which is that inequalities must be reduced within and amongst countries. And under this goal, which I urge you to go and have a look at, targets include social protection, labor rights, the promotion of safe and secure working environments for all workers, and especially those in quote-unquote precarious employment. Now, the Open Working Group never speaks about home-based workers, and recalling that it is still under negotiation, you may want to think about how you bring your declaration to the attention of member states as they move forward with Sustainable Development Goals. And so I think in this context, we are all called upon to better understand from the spaces where we have influence and where we live and dwell and participate, how economic, macroeconomic, and social policies can be instruments, better instruments of justice by promoting inclusive growth and by distributing and redistributing its benefits. In this regard, I think we need a much better understanding of home-based work. And we need more research and we need more data collection to enable policymakers to respond to the realities and specificities of home-based workers, to ensure the protection, respect, and fulfillment of the rights of workers in the sphere of the home. And looking at your declaration, I'm struck at the emphasis given to the challenges of the interaction between home-based workers and the public sphere, the markets, for example, for the private sector. And I'm wondering about the challenges which home-based workers also have in the interaction in the private sphere. So what, for example, would we have to say about the heightened vulnerability of home-based workers to violence in the home, given that we know isolation is certainly one of the features of heightened vulnerability? What also, too, would we want to say about the burden of care, the reproductive burden of care, which home-based workers also carry along with the productive responsibilities that they have, which, of course, bring an income into the households. And I think that these are ways in which we have to think about a comprehensive agenda that breaks that dichotomy between reproductive and productive, between private and public. So something for us to think about as we move along. So we approach this moment, this SDG moment, this Beijing Plus 20 review moment, knowing that this is a time for bold vision and activism, knowing that there has never been such a time as now when we have reached the limits of the planetary boundaries of resources. But addressing these oppressions in the private sphere and in the public sphere requires us to think in profoundly integrated ways and to act in partnership and solidarity for the common good in the interests of the majority. The post-2015 agenda needs us to speak directly to the imperative of structural change. Thank you, Devaki, for that reminder. And we need to close the implementation gap with political will, with allocation of resources, and with strengthening of institutions for accountability. We need implementation, in other words, all of the things that we have agreed to globally, regionally, and nationally. And that's what we call accountability. Accountability is to secure the transformation of the lives of women and girls, especially the most excluded, the most marginalized, the most invisibilized across our diversities. And this accountability, I think we would agree, extends to non-state actors. And I was very intrigued this morning about the discussion around how we would incorporate private sector in our demands. And I wish to note that in 2014, in July 2014, the Human Rights Council established a working group on human rights and transnational corporations with a mandate to promote the effective and comprehensive dissemination and implementation of something called guiding principles on business and human rights, including with a gender perspective to give special attention to people living in vulnerable situations. And I also do urge WeGo and HomeNet to have a look at the documentation which comes from the working group on human rights and business, because I think that was directly relevant, of course, to the agenda of home-based workers. So, but let us not be, I think, naive, and I don't think anyone in this room is naive. And let us acknowledge that there's tremendous resistance to this quest we have for equality and development, equitable development by home-based workers. Power, and what we're talking about power in this context is power of capital accumulation, power of the private sector, does not give up without a fight. And unlike Martin Luther King, who speaks about the moral arc of justice, he's very optimistic about that. I think it's not so much that the moral arc bends towards justice, but it's that our activism, our advocacy, and our accountability makes that arc move towards justice. So the work of advancing gender equality is a work essentially about confronting and disrupting power relationships where women's worth and women's work is valued. Finally, I want to end by recalling that our solidarity and determination is needed to end isolation, to end invisibility, and to end oppression of home-based workers. Our determination is needed to ensure that those who work from home are equally protected and have the fullest access to resources needed to secure self-development first and foremost, but also equitable participation in economic growth. And our vigilance, perhaps I should have started with vigilance. Our vigilance is needed to monitor how the state protects, respects, and fulfills women's rights, and how private sector is held to account for labor practices and for equitable market access. Let me congratulate you on your Delhi Declaration, on your National Plan of Action, and celebrate with you this milestone along the common road to ensure greater access to human rights by all, but especially by home-based workers. I want to assure you of UN Women's commitment to this common cause. We will stand with you in strengthening and expanding the partnerships to which you referred in your declaration. We stand with you in your advocacy for a larger ratification of ILO Convention 177. We stand with you in making visible the contributions of home-based workers to national economies, but also the stability of families, of households, and to their communities. I want to urge you to develop perhaps a short-term agenda in the context of post-2015, where you bring the declaration to the attention of member states who are currently negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, I want to end once again by thanking Chandi for thinking about UN Women and bringing us back into the fold, and indirectly and perhaps implicitly saying, you, UN Women, you have some accountability here as well. Thank you very much.